You boys know what's about to happen to you. You leave now.
Some consider these traits to be toxic, such as undesirable in the men of today. We consider these traits such as these not only to be desirable, but to be appreciated and celebrated. Welcome to the Toxic Male Appreciation Show, hosted by and La Reina Creole. Welcome to the safe space for the toxic male.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Lorena Creole, and of course, I am here with my wing woman, of positive fandom, and this is, of course, is the Toxic Male Appreciation Show, where we appreciate the heck out of you guys who are deemed toxic as problematic, but we know you're not. You're not problematic. I think that's the gist of it, right? Right, my dear?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Lorraine, it's always good to be here on Toxic Male Appreciation. Certainly, we love toxic males. And this show is all about how wonderful they are and how we need them in our lives and entertainment pretty much everywhere, Lorraine.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, granted, I guess being a cheerleader, I was kind of in that like atmosphere of like sports and competition and, watching, I would say, what your nascent toxic males in like high school and everything. So I was like immersed, in all of that. I never really thought it was quote unquote toxic. It kind of like it just is what it is. And before we get to the topic of actually of our show, I remember you had told me about this series, Ted Lasso. Now, I had never seen this. I hadn't seen this. I think I canceled my Apple TV because, well, I had it for free for the longest time and hardly ever, really used this. But apparently, I got the gist it was some kind of sports thing or whatever, and I'm like, oh, is it like Arliss or or Ballers or something like that? But turns out an American college football coach heads to London to manage the AFC Richmond, a struggling English Premier League football team. Have you seen this show?
I watched a few episodes, and you're right, Lorraine. Yeah, the show is about an inexperienced coach, and the reason why he was brought in, I think, is kind of. I don't know whether he knows this, but the idea is that they're hoping that they're not expecting him to necessarily be successful. And because they're bringing him under false intentions, it's kind of like was it Major League, or where the team was deprived of everything they needed to win, but
Yes, it was Major League. Yes.
And they kind of improvise, and then they end up winning the World Series. And it wasn't even till the end of the World Series where they win the World Series that the owner was like, yeah, I guess they're not a bad team. But, kind of this notion that, they don't necessarily care whether this team wins or loses. She wanted the team to lose in Major League so she could move them to, I think, Miami or something, right? Or maybe even to Los Angeles or something.
Yeah.
So she was like, I can't wait to get out of this town. Once they lose, then it is going to give me the chance to move them to where I want to go. In this particular case, Ted is completely inexperienced being a coach for something like this, and of course, over there, they take their football seriously. It's the most popular sport in the world. And here he is getting a job, but he doesn't really have the experience to win anything or do anything with this. How on earth is this going to turn out with the intention that they're hoping that it's going to be a failure? And so it is a very interesting twist that his optimism leads to the success, I guess, of the team and other things that happen. It ends up being a show that won a lot of awards, Lorena.
I heard that. That's why I had kind of piqued my interest a little bit, like, maybe I need to go and eventually check it out and see what all the fuss was about, especially after you had shared this article with me. It says Ted Lasso reflects non toxic masculinity in series finale. Um, where am I going to start with this? Granted, I am not a huge fan of soccer, but I appreciate its position as a sport in the world. I bought myself a Manchester United soccer jersey when I was in the UK. That's equivalent to buying a, Dallas Cowboys jersey over here, in the in the US because of how popular and iconic, they are as a team over there. I've seen really toxic males at soccer games, Premier League games. I mean, where else are you going to see people? I mean,
Yeah.
you think some hockey fights bad. I've seen some fights at some soccer games that were pretty darn bad. And pub celebrations that were absolutely insane. So I'm a little confused. How about you?
Well, I think that this article is misguided because I don't think that toxic masculinity in itself is actually, I think, and you agree, it's not toxic at all. It's just a description that's given to describe so many of the traits that we love in men and that we like to see in entertainment, the roles of men, traditional roles of men. And as far as I'm concerned, Ted Lasso becomes increasingly that role for everybody in the team. You know, his attitude, his focus away from what would normally be focused on in the series to other things, these sort of ties between two people, between two men, their emotions. You know, toxic masculinity deals a lot with that, because what happens is in toxic masculinity, I think that those males have to respond in a way that's respectful, that's in the best interest for everybody involved, and often they sacrifice their happiness for other people's happiness. And then we see that again over and over again with toxic males. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not quite sure whether this is non-toxic masculinity. I think in this particular series, it's just an even more emotional version of a toxic male than we normally see, with men, you know, openly discussing their feelings with men because they're not around, they're around groups of people that they trust. So for me, the interpretation of this was that as this team gets closer, as these men get closer, they're going to reveal more things about themselves, but they're also willing to put themselves on the line for each other even more. And that's incredibly toxic male.
Hmm. Well, we are actually going to step through this article, especially as I have run into articles like this, Ted Lasso and the fantasy of soft masculinity. So that is Modern Man. That's actually from the New York Times, courtesy of the Wayback Machine, one of my favorite places to go to. And another interesting article, Ted Lasso is proof that sports and toxic masculinity don't have to go hand in hand. Now we're going to go back to this article after we go through the other one to kind of talk about this statement. You know, is it really true? What the heck are they, trying to say with respect to this? So this is courtesy of earlychirp.com, which is a very interesting site. I hadn't heard of them, but I hadn't heard of them before. So let's see. Over the course of its 3-season run, Ted Lasso and its titular protagonist, played by Jason Sudeikis, I probably said that wrong. Sudeikis, there we go. Okay, sound it out. Has evolved in some unmistakable ways. Perhaps most notable is the emphasis on showcasing men in an unstereotypical way. That
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I'm confused. I'm just like, okay, and because when I hear the word unstereotypical, it's like, okay, are we talking unstereotypical like Mrs. Doubtfire? Are we talking unstereotypical like in I want to say, for example, in Mission Impossible, the first movie, and Ving Rhames' character, he's this big, huge, hulking guy. You think he's like a bodyguard, but he's not. He's a darn nerd. You know, I'm like, is that is it like say a single father like in Daddy's Little Girls where the father is the primary caretaker of of the children, protecting them against a mother that is not very good for them. I don't get that impression when I hear this. When I hear unstereotypical, it sounds like a backhanded compliment.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe that men don't express emotions. I think they express emotions all the time, and I think perhaps what we're seeing, or at least what this is focusing on, is not realizing that these emotions are expressed in different ways in men. An example of that is the I think it's called the Banshees of Inisherin, where the men were expressing their emotions. One guy was doing it; he was actually self-harming himself. So it's not. I don't know whether it means that showcasing men in an unstereotypical way is truthful. I think men show emotion all the time. I think perhaps it's not focused on, or no one wants to talk about how men feel about things. Although I'm not quite sure why they don't wish to do that, in perhaps from this author's point of view. But I think men, always are definitely focusing on their emotions, and maybe they don't wear their heart on their sleeve, but you can tell a lot of times how a man feels, often just by looking at him. So I'm not quite sure about it being unstereotypical. I think that men, and I don't want to stereotype men at all. This is not about that, but I think that the show looks at men in many different ways, but perhaps maybe not in an unstereotypical way, because a lot of what I saw and have seen in this show is very stereotypical of men, because men will tell you how they feel. When they're upset, they're not going to try and hide those things from you. So, at least as far as I can see in real life and in sports, how those men feel. There's no confusion.
No, if you think men do not have feelings, you have never been in a sports bar with a group of men and they're watching the finals,
Yes.
and their team freaking loses.
Yeah.
Okay. or wins.
Yeah.
I don't get that. It's like I've seen that. I've seen like men talk about what it was like, to hold their children after after they were born. Men who, definitely feel emotion when they feel like they can't provide for their families. I think, and this is a common misconception, I think that when you have people write things like this about men in an unstereotypical way, and they can show their emotion, they make the mistake of thinking that men should be portrayed like women. Women like to sit around and talk about the feelings. That's the thing. We get that out. We talk to each other. You okay? How you doing? You okay? Whatever. I'm I'm generalizing, but I kind of am. There are outliers, but guys will sit around and do that. At least not deep, feelings like that, unless it's around another man that they trust that way, or a woman that they trust that way. But it's not like they're out, you know, throwing, their emotions everywhere. Like, oh, I have to cry over this. I have to weep over this just because, something, something happened. It's like they're not women. And I think this is why this really irritates me, because it's almost like they're trying to say in order for men to truly be men, they have to behave as women when it comes to emotions. And I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that's really interesting about this is it is true that men have been portrayed in films in different ways, but I'm not quite sure whether it's really making a point of saying they're portrayed as toxic, because they've been portrayed lots of different ways now. This isn't 1950. This is 2023, and we've seen so many different portrayals of men on the screen and in real life during sports events, as you said. We've seen so many different things now. This is not necessarily, I think, a groundbreaking statement. While there might be some truth to it, it's not stating both sides. I think that there's a lot of ways that men are being portrayed now, and it's not just the idea of it being, toxic, and there's this huge, issue of toxicity. It's really not true. We're seeing men in so many different ways. I think that this is just something that they want to hold on to. This is not the article I would have written about Ted Lasso. This is not
Interesting that you say that, considering that you've seen it. I haven't seen it, and I'm just like, is this really what it's about? I mean, you have Jason Sudeikis, who looks somewhat like a one-off of Mike Ditka. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was on purpose.
Yeah.
Mike Ditka, former, coach of the world famous, Chicago Bears, the Bears, the Bears,
William Refrigerator Perry.
Yes, everybody flipping knew them. I mean, that was just, such a fun time. And back when the NFL was fun.
Mhm.
But even with television, it's like, you mean to tell me that the TV dads are toxic? Like the dad from Family Matters, the dad from 227,
Yeah,
the dad from Fresh
Family
Prince,
Ties.
dad from Family Ties.
He was like not at all bad. He and his wife were like these two kind of hippie parents who were incredibly feeling and loving. Like, this was so different from the reality of what we even saw on regular television anyway. We didn't have television shows where the men are generally abusive at all. So this is something to think about. I'm not quite sure if it's a film that talks about abuse, that's different. But for the most part, that's not what I see entertainment as. So I'm not quite sure. This is kind of grasping at something. It wants to make it appear as if it's a huge problem. At least I think that's what it says often in real life is toxic. I'm not quite sure whether it was really a concern. I think men have been showing emotion for quite some time.
I agree. I think they've been showing it. They show it differently.
Yes.
They show it. They show it in different. They show it in different ways. Like, for example, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think. One of my favorite toxic male shows is Married with Children. Daggone it, I love that show. Al Bundy, he's just like, I don't want to go into my house. And like the opening where he's just taking money out of his wallet, give to his kids. His wife takes the wallet, Peggy takes the wallet. He hates his job, but he knows that he has to provide, for his family. And I forget which one. I don't know if it was the one where Kelly snuck out a whole bunch of times, but I guess her boyfriend like broke her heart, and it's like it seems like Al's not really affected, and Peggy's like, Al basically shows some emotion, and he basically takes a guy by the jacket. Yeah, it's good seeing you here. Shuts the door, has the kid slam into the door. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry about that, and slams his head in the door again. I mean, it's emotion, but different. In the same way, and nothing was no one really looked down on that. As a matter of fact, the audience kept laughing at that because we got that. It's like he couldn't be emotional like the mother, but you saw him manifest his emotion and how he felt about the situation. I just don't. They throw this term toxic out here. They do not define what it is, but they throw it out there like a pejorative.
You and I think, have a similar definition of this. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a toxic male. I think abusers exist. I think they do, but there's nothing toxic about being male. I don't think that the culture pushes men to be toxic. I don't believe any of that. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think the pressure is for men to stand down. And what happens is that they get tired of getting punched in the face, and their natural defense mechanism kind of goes in, and sometimes they respond. Sometimes they're in a situation where they're fighting for their lives too. So a lot happens. We know that in bully situations, we see so many kids just taking punches. We've seen it. Like, it's We see it time and
Mhm.
time again. Most of these kids are holding it in. So I just don't believe that there's this notion of male behaviors that is that way. I think that people who do that, those are abusers, and it has nothing to do with being male. And toxic masculinity is something that was created, that someone wanted to create, but I just don't believe that there's anything toxic in that way. How do you feel about it right now?
I just feel that it's an excuse for people who are uncomfortable with traditional masculinity because one of the things that I've noticed, especially why we watch Indian cinema so much, and another thing that I notice with anime and also what I notice with South Korean entertainment, this is not there. It isn't quote unquote toxic masculinity. It's just, it's just masculinity. And there doesn't seem to be a problem with that. But for some reason here, I say some reason, I'm being rhetorical when I say this, men behaving as traditional with traditional masculinity and being proud of traditional masculine values, somehow that's a problem with that. When I watch foreign cinema, I don't see this shaming of traditional male values. I don't see that. So I think some people are threatened by that. I think you have especially third wave feminists, because remember, the first wave of feminism was not at the expense of men. It was just like, if I'm qualified, if I can do the job, let me do it. If I decide that I want to go to work, respect that. If I decide that I want to stay home and raise my children, respect that.
Mhm.
That's what feminism was initially, about. But now you have this third wave where men are the problem, men are this. I could get ahead if it wasn't for men, and wouldn't everything be great if women just ran the world? That's what this is coming from, and it's, as you can see, it's invaded a lot of our entertainment, of a lot in our media, and even with writing an article about a show like this. So for this one with the title, "There's Room for Emotion," sports, of course, is going to be emotion in it.
So emotional, so emotional. Oh my gosh, come
I
on.
I think this person has never watched sports. I really think this person has never watched sports. I That's just the only interpretation I can come up with. Whereas men have long been portrayed in films on TV, and oh well, no, we did. Oh wait, yeah, we did that one. Apple TV series offers a different narrative, and it was on full display in the final episode.
This
Okay,
is
so let's
not
go
the
down
first
here.
show that's done this in a show. So this is not
No.
the first time we've ever seen anything like what we're seeing here. As I said, we saw it in Major League. We've seen this in a number of different shows, where the locker room experience is different. For me, my favorite one is, gosh, what is it called? It's well, Arliss was my ultimate favorite show, and I know
I
you know
loved Arliss.
there was a lot of emotion in Arliss. There was, I mean, it's true he was a bit of a cash grabber, but the players made him, dance and sing and do whatever he had to do to make things work. So there was a lot going on in that show. But Ballers. I think that was The Rock's best show because he had to deal with all the crap, all the emotions, all the personalities with these
Mhm.
players in a way that I've never seen anybody have to finagle do, except for maybe Entourage. So as far as I'm concerned, this is not the first time we've seen something where somebody has to find an alternative or an innovative way of dealing with what goes on in a team.
Exactly, and something that I just thought of, if you have never seen this movie, Any Given Sunday, watch this film,
Yes,
okay?
yes. And I would add another one, Varsity Blues.
Yes, that's another one. Watch those movies, and you will see plenty of quote unquote toxic males showing emotion, especially with motivating people, you know, rising to the occasion or dealing with, the agony of defeat. Yes, I'm kind of dating myself there. But all that has been out there. So it seems like perhaps it's this person who's doing this article who's never watched any sports, or maybe just doesn't understand sports. But she says, sure, I'm sorry if I misgendered you. There are a bunch of jocks who spend a lot of the show in a locker room. Nevertheless, they're willing to reveal a little vulnerability when it came time to say goodbye to one another.
These guys cry, like they cry when the stuff is over. We see tears, and that's on a normal basis. Like there's a lot of tears on the field and off. Like it's an incredibly emotional thing for these players. There's a lot on the line, and emotion is out there. I just really surprised to see that. That it's really surprising to me.
Wow. And let's see, in addition to the team he led, Lasso's character included insight into the struggles he experienced in his relationship as a son and father. Okay, how many other sports TV shows and movies is there always that narrative about, you know, I'm your son, I'm not one of your players or something like that, how they have to perform on the field because some of them that feels that there's the only way that they feel validated for having people look up to them. I forget which movie it was, but one guy who I think not the NFL, I think it was the NFL, it was a movie, I think it was, where
Uh-huh.
he was like, yeah, I have something to prove to my father that I'm worth something. So every time, I make a touchdown, so he can see that I was worth sticking around for. I mean, you see stuff like that. So this is not something new, and it indicates here, at least to me, as looking at it as someone who has not seen the show, like this is some new thing.
We saw it in the Best Man series. I can't remember what it's called now. That we did the watch party of, where the main character, his son, said that he was playing for his dad. You know, he was doing that. He didn't want to. He has talent as an athlete, but that wasn't what he wanted to do. And he played and showed that he was capable of doing all that. And his father was very engrossed in his career and his future. But you could see that that was a huge part, at least for that in that particular case, where his father was the major, football star, and then he's playing, going in his father's footsteps. But it was certainly a struggle between the two of them, like a big struggle, if you remember.
Right.
And
Right.
that was such a good story. Oh my God, it was so good. So it's not unique, and you're right. We see it time and time again. It's a huge trope in stories with sports coaches and fathers. That's big. That's
Hmm.
one of the big tropes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to go down here a little bit, then there's the character of Rupert, who
Mhm.
embodies the traits that the rest of the show makes an effort to eschew. Hmm. Whereas most of the characters have been inching towards a new take on masculinity, he finished out the series as an exception to the rule. I already like Rupert already, and I haven't even seen him.
Yeah, there is some truth to that. I think trying to get characters to stand out did work on this particular show, but once again, there was nothing. There was nothing I felt that was groundbreaking on it. I'm not saying the show wasn't a good show. It's a good show, but I think that this idea of um, these approaches, I don't think it's a new take on masculinity. I think we saw some characters who, there was one guy in Major League who had an idol that he worshipped before he played.
Yes. I remember that.
Yeah, and it was important because the guy was like, "Did you remember Charlie Sheen messed him up or knocked him over, and he had a horrible game?" And he's
Yeah.
like, "It's because you disrespected him." And Charlie Sheen believed it. I mean, that's definitely a skew away from what most players might be thinking, although some do believe in luck and all that. But this was extreme, like to have a totem in the locker room and praying to it. Um, it's definitely something that I don't think is as common, as very different. Maybe even it might have been a bit of a they're trying to have some fun with, people who play, let's say, baseball from the Caribbean, and their
I
religious
think they
values.
did because that was, I think, a point in time where a lot of the Dominican
Yeah.
baseball players were coming into the NFL,
Yes.
and you had some broadcasters who couldn't say their name right. Like I remember on my local channel, this one baseball player from the Dominican Republic. He played for he got recruited by the Phillies, so he was playing for the Phillies. It's an inaugural season, and the sportscaster says, "Yes, and here we have Ivan DeJesus." I'm like, it's DeJesus. And I'm just like, that's, I think, what that was kind of indicating. It's like, yeah, he was cool with most of the people, but you had the people who were just like, whatever he has to do, so long as he's hitting home runs, we don't care. That one person is just like, that's ridiculous. Yeah, until you took the rum, and then your game sucked after that.
See, it is very funny seeing that, and I think they wanted to just show kind of different. They wanted to show different cultures in Major League, and they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to do that. He could have just been another player in the background, but he got to Charlie Sheen, you see, and that was because what inevitably happens a lot of times with these baseball teams and football teams is that the players end up relying on one another for validation. Not entirely, but a lot of times they do. And, they're kind of look to each other like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing out there? Like, what's going on? They do confide in one another, and their performance matters, not just to them individually, but to the whole team. So a lot is riding on it, and they do get emotional about it. He got emotional when he saw that thing was down. He saw it was down. And then when he said that to Charlie Sheen, he was just like, okay, I think it was the Charlie Sheen character because he had a bad pitching night that night.
Yeah, because he had to get glasses, so because he couldn't see how to pitch straight. They called it a wild thing. Oh God! Something else that I thought about which is another one of my favorite movies, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, and the general manager, because he's pissed that the mascot was missing. And oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her character, Courtney Cox, where she's just like, it's just a dolphin that's missing. He's just like,
what,
lady, do you know it's the week before the Super Bowl? Football players are some of the most superstitious people on the planet. He's like, I've got a player who hasn't washed his jockstrap in 20 years. He's like, so we have to get that darn mascot back. You need to find it.
It was critical.
But he's going through the whole list of like all of these rituals that each team member has. And he's just like, we can't mess that up. Okay. And he's very emotional about it. He basically said, you either find this fish or you get new jobs. And she's like, well, it's not a fish, it's a mammal. He's just like, I don't freaking care. Oh God, I love that darn movie. Finkel is Einhorn. That's all I'm going to say. So, final words to live by, and this is that there's Chris down there. There's Chris.
And I do want to say that the early chirp, who's kind of commenting on this and a number of different articles where they comment on this. This is actually a pretty good newsletter where they're trying to, what they're doing is that they're writing a newsletter that is upbeat, that in their opinion has positive news and, is looking on the bright side of life more or less. And I think that that's a very positive message, this early chirp newsletter. I think that is great. I think that's good, but I don't care for this article, early chirp.
It does not, it seems very biased. And I think that's the thing that I don't, that we don't like about it. And that's, why I got on our radar here, is that there was a way to write this to basically give the merits of the show and, hey, this is great about the show. Here's some things that I don't quite like about the show, but without using such charged language as toxic, as problematic, things like that. They already demonize men in this article, like, hey, isn't it great that Ted Lasso doesn't have those awful toxic men out there that we all know in real life and and on television? It's like, was that really even necessary to to do that? And this sentence, this paragraph here, I do like. If you just pull this out. It says pretty much all the men portrayed in the series have encountered their own challenges along the way. And while they might have shown an instinctive tendency to bottle things up or to become angry, they ultimately decided to deal with their issues in a healthy and healing way.
Now, that's what the article should have just been about, what you just said. That whole section here, that's all they should have built on. There didn't have to be anything else in this article. Like, you could actually just remove everything else and work off of this one sentence and write a decent article. As far as I'm concerned. But the rest of it was not necessarily significant in any way. I think that the fact that they were able to develop these wonderful characters in the show that has won so many awards, primetime Emmys, they've been recognized in having, a fantastic show, is wonderful. But I don't think this has anything to do with toxic masculinity or their fantasy of what it means to be a toxic male. I don't think this show challenges that or even has anything to do with that. I think this is a show about a man who's out of his element and is thrown into this position, just like so many of us sometimes end up in jobs that we didn't think we were going to have to do or wanted.
Right.
Handle that situation when you might be at a position where there are challenges you can't anticipate. I'm not saying he didn't want the position, but how do you end up and how do you handle a job where there are situations where you can't anticipate? He can't anticipate what it's like to be in a completely different culture because it's not the United States. He knows what that's like. Now he's in a different country and it's completely different. How do you handle that?
Exactly. So to kind of head towards wrapping this up, although, I forget this line down at the bottom, again, another one where literally all they had to do was use that sentence and this sentence. The best we can do is to keep asking for help and accepting it when you can, he said. And if you keep on doing that, you'll always be moving toward better. So this is what the character Leslie said in the finale. And this isn't specific or special just to Ted Lasso. How many other sports films and TV shows have we seen where there's someone who they do need help? The one that gets their knee blown out, the one that, hey, they were the first stringer, quarterback and they're in the hospital. So now, the second stringer who's just used to sitting there on the bench all of a sudden has to take over, doesn't have the confidence. And the rest of the team is just like, look, dude, whatever you got to do, whatever we got to do to get you ready for the game, we're behind you. We've seen those types of things happen. So while Ted Lasso, it's nice to see, it's not the first or the only example that is out there.
Yeah, and I think what I would have said is my article would have said kindness goes a long way, and you can see that in Ted Lasso because he's known for this kindness. The man who plays Ted has won a Golden Globe Award for playing that role. He's won an Emmy Award, as I said, for playing the role. He's won a lot of awards for this character. And I think that this could have been, the kindness takes on, a different light in this show, Ted Lasso, where, being kind to others does have a positive effect and we see it in the show. Um, that's what I think the heart of the message is for Ted Lasso and its success, because that's not the type of. I think that what's interesting is that Ted Lasso's approach, I think, is life is what you make it, and your approach to life,
Mm,
what you think of your life, even if it's not the life that you want, that approach of your life, that your interpretation of how your life is going, that's the reality of what your life is. And for Ted Lasso, being kind, the idea of kindness to people in an industry, I'm going to say this is a tough industry with a lot of competition. There's a great expectations for them to all perform at their best, and
hmm
they have to deal with that as a team, when they do and when they don't. It's unfortunately the reality of the situation. Not every team is going to be number one, and so coming into a situation where that he's already been coaching teams and understands what that means. But I think it is very interesting, the idea of using kindness. And I think for the most part, and we've seen these coaches, all of us who have ever watched a game, whether it's professional or, from a
hmm
school, or, your local school, as you're driving by, you see the kids playing. These coaches are practicing a lot of kindness when it comes to the kids who are learning, and maybe not
hmm
the best players and making mistakes, and you just keep it going, and the kids don't know where to go, and there's a lot of kindness involved in doing these types of positions. And perhaps that's also something that was needed for this team. They needed that injection of kindness that they
hmm
got from Ted Lasso. So I think that would have been a very interesting approach to this article. So that's all I have to say about it.
Well, that's very, very, very well said. And I kind of want to lead into this other article that I had pulled up earlier. Now, this article is written by a Bonnie Sternberg, who says, this is to show you the Daily Chirp article is not in isolation here. Ted Lasso is proof that sports and toxic masculinity don't have to go hand in hand. We need more men like Ted.
It has nothing to do with toxic
You
masculinity.
have the floor.
It has nothing to do with toxic masculinity, because most of these players are not abusing one another. That's not the reality of sports. Most of them are not abusing one another. So I don't quite understand where that's coming from. As I said, I think that there are abusers, but it has nothing to do with being male. Absolutely nothing to do with that. So, yeah.
Well, let's see what she's got, because usually the first paragraph is the one where they come out with gangbusters. So
Okay.
let's see. So often when we see sports, professional or otherwise, depicted in pop culture, they're reflecting the worst, most toxic elements of masculinity.
Sounds like the same Chat GPT line.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't it though?
Have any proof? I do not have any proof that this is written by Chat GPT. I'm just saying personally, from someone who writes all day long for work and reads and has to write even more, it's a very, very generic line, and it's certainly not too far out of what we would see from our friend Chat GPT
Mm-hmm.
generating.
Coming out with a bang.
Hmm.
Of all the things in one sentence to trigger you, whether you're just like, yay, that's exactly what you should be saying, or oh heck no, I cannot believe what this is saying. But I'll say that unlike the Daily Chirp, they actually give us their definition of toxic in this
Ah,
context. So
okay.
let's read this here. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Coaches are gruff and abusive, convinced they can motivate their players to win with intimidation and physical punishment.
Hmm.
Again, someone who I don't think has ever watched sports, has ever seen any training that that goes on, and I'm sorry. There's coaches with different styles, but sometimes you got to do what you have to do to get the best, you know, out of out of your players. So I don't know what they mean by intimidation and physical punishment. Intimidation meaning you don't get your crap together. Guess what? You're not playing first team the next game. Physical punishment probably like, hey, go out there and run wind sprints or do burpees or stuff like that. Again, someone who's probably never been in a competitive sport or observed a competitive team sport at all.
Yeah, this is very, very biased, a very biased article. It's some coaches may be that way, but for the most part, it's not the norm. That's not
Yeah.
the norm.
No, I mean, you had some coaches where that was, that was their personality. But guess what? They were freaking winning games. So there was something usually behind that. Some coaches are no nonsense. Some are, not so much. But this
Mhm.
whole painting all coaches as this is what they do. They're all gruff, abusive, and use intimidation and physical punishment. Locker rooms are rife with homophobia, misogyny, and cruel pranks.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
I'm sorry. It's like, are you in one? Um, Locker room. First of all, it's like what guys talk about in a locker room. That's what they talk about in a locker room when they know they are not in what is it they say, mixed company.
Oh, well, that's different. The smack talk is a little different, because that's part of the game. And they will speak about either women or men, whatever they're interested in. So that happens. And a lot of times, so this is totally for me, my own self indulgence. If you go into some of these professional locker rooms, the men are still getting dressed, so you're going to see a lot. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, yeah. And here's my favorite: victory is a must. As Dale Earnhardt once said, second place is just first loser. Or if you've ever seen Ricky Bobby, Ballad of Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last. But of course, victory is a must. You play to win. And if you don't win, you figure out what happened so you could go back and win the next time. It's why is there this spin as if victory is a bad thing? Victory is a must. Of course, you're going in there to win. It's a different thing. It's a difference between victory as a must and victory at all costs. Those are two
Mhm.
very different things.
Agreed. And most athletes, I would say, especially the ones that win the most, go in thinking they're going to win. They don't believe they're going to lose that game. If they walked in and thought they were going to lose the game, no one would ever win. They walk in with the intention, with the belief that they will win that game, even if the odds are against them. So victory is definitely something that they're striving for. I mean, that's absurd to think that that isn't something that they're all not thinking about. If that's their number one goal.
I do, again, it's somebody who obviously has never played a sport, but I'm gonna pick something out. Remember we were talking about Mike Ditka?
Yes.
Jason Sudeikis looks the part. He's got the mustache and the Mike Ditka glasses. I told you.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, my dear. As soon as he put on the Mike Ditka glasses, that was toxic masculinity right then and there. That's all I'm gonna say. And if they didn't want to tap into that, one of those icons of toxic masculinity in a good way, why would they be trying to parody Mike Ditka? And I'm a woman, and I said Mike Dicker.
I mean, yeah, and he does kind of look like that. And I think that with the next few sentences, it might have been showing men at their best. You know, kindness
Hmm.
rules um, in the locker room when under Ted Lasso's tutelage or whatever. Um,
Right.
because I think that that is you do see these the best side of men. Oftentimes in situations like this where it is hard to deal with different outcomes in these games, especially I think that the bad calls are the hardest ones to deal with. Um,
Oh, yeah.
if you can forget it and go on, then you're a lucky one. But oftentimes they remember these bad calls that happen and they have to go on with the game. And it's very hard when there's so much at stake. So um, I think that this this thing that he does is typical of what we see
Hmm.
in sports. I think this is the more typical version of what we're actually is the truth um, there. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of bad calls, all I'm going to say is laces out.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's all I'm going to say. So, folks, yes, men do have feelings. Toxic
Mhm,
men have feelings.
mhm.
They're just exhibited differently. And Hollywood needs to learn the lesson that just because men do not behave as women with their emotions, that they're any less valid with the way that they choose to handle them.
Yes, and being toxic has nothing to do with being male, and this notion that that masculinity promotes toxic behaviors, it's not true. I think for
No,
the most part it's the opposite. I think that the majority of men that we see from day to day promote the opposite feeling in their masculinity, and a lot of them have to deal with whatever it is, these events that happen sporadically, between. But for the most part, we're walking the streets and there aren't fights breaking out every 5 seconds.
no, no
It's not
fights
kind of
breaking out, you know.
yeah.
Hey lady, you don't have to put your own air in the tires. I can do that for you. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but I need to learn how to do this on my
Yeah.
own. And I felt horrible about it, but it was just like I acknowledge that you want to do that, hold the door open,
And we're
uh
grateful.
very, very grateful for it. I had one young man, he must have been like about 8 or whatever, held the door for me. And I was like, thank you so much. You're such a polite gentleman. I appreciate that. Those types of things. You don't have, men out here telling women what to do all the time. It's not like that. And there was a time in our entertainment where let's say that inaccurate stereotype was not reinforced. So just to say, with Ted Lasso, the lessons of kindness that are in it, so-called non-toxic masculinity has nothing whatsoever really to do with it. And I think it's what people are trying to project because of their own insecurity with traditional masculine values.
Yeah. And it's kindness is the norm um across the board. So that I just wanted to point that out, that kindness is the norm. Ted Lasso may be the norm rather than the exception to the rule.
Hmm. Yeah. Mike Ditka had his had his kindness points too.
Mhm.
Oh, well, folks, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of Toxic Male Appreciation, where we appreciate the heck out of you, toxic males, your traditional masculine values, and you are supported and appreciated on this show. So, would would you like to tell the people where they can find you?
Well, guys, you can always find me on my channel, Positive Fandom, where I do all the parlay in the fandom. I do live streams of games. I also have my show, Sunday Brunch on Sundays, and a bunch of other things coming up. Lorena, you and I are going to be doing our Outlander live watch parties. God bless you for joining me for that.
Yes, it's gonna be
I'm so
wonderful.
excited for that. Yeah, it's going to be good. But you can also find me on the Burnett Network with Lorena on our show, Ladies of the PGS, on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also going to do a watch party this Saturday, Kubrick on Kubrick. It's going to be before the watch party I do with you, Lorena. Mine is at 6, yours is at 8. So make sure you check me out on the Burnett Network at 6 p.m. for my Kubrick watch party. And I'll be with Lorena at 8 p.m. Is it The Little Mermaid?
Yes, the original Little Mermaid, the animated Little Mermaid. Yes, there will be singing.
Yes, we're going to sing. And guys, tonight, right after this, I'm going to be doing on my channel, Positive Fandom, a Midway 2019 watch party with Darth Plato, the PGS historian. So please do check that out as well.
Excellent, excellent, folks. You have got to subscribe to Positive Fandom. All the great
Thank
information
you
that
for
she
having me here,
has and
Lorena.
streams on her channel. As always, love, love, love having you here. Your girl is about to head on over to WDW Pro's channel, his live show every Thursday at 5. I join in the second hour because, of course, first hour I'm doing this show. All of just the pop culture that's out there. We have a good time, just having fun, and throwing shade is necessary, but we try to keep it upbeat over there on the show. And let's see, of course, you can find me on Sundays for the Welcome to Florida show at 8 p.m. Eastern. Let's see, this Saturday, I will not have a theme park show on Saturday because I have a previous engagement. However, Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern, I am going to be coming to you live from Disney's Pop Century Resort. It is one of my favorite value resorts over in Walt Disney World. And we're going to walk through the resort. And I'm going to show you all the great stuff that they have there, answer your questions, and we're just going to have a good time exploring one of the resorts, which is actually a cool day activity to do in and of itself. So, with that said, folks, as always, thank you so very much for joining me. You toxic males, stay toxic, and we will see you next time. Bye.